Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I thought it was important this afternoon to provide an update to the public, particularly based on the announcement made by the members of the Bermuda Trade Union Congress late last night. But first, I think it's important to clarify some of the media reports emanating from last night. I want to stress very clearly, as it relates to Mr. Ferbert's comments that I was invited to last night's press conference, the public should know that I never received an invitation to attend the press briefing, which, in our opinion, was premature. I think it is also critical to note that throughout yesterday's proceedings, throughout the disagreements and the impasse, great strides were made by government to ensure that we made progress in getting both parties back to the negotiating table. And I want to take this opportunity to commend the efforts of everyone involved in reaching a very significant goal. Last evening, when I joined members of the Bermuda Trade Union Congress on the cabinet steps to announce that the government and the union had agreed to meet to consider additional cost reductions, which included a number of options identified by cabinet, I also made the very critical point that the government and the BTUC agreed that continuing the furlough day would be considered as a last resort. Last night's discussions were at an incredibly delicate stage, and it was government's view that any cost reduction considerations be reviewed and vetted by the cabinet before any public announcement was shared. I think it is very, very important that I stress that the required reductions in expenditure have not been fully reached, contrary to the BTUC's declaration last night. The Ministry of Finance and the Cabinet Office are verifying the numbers as we speak, but early indications are that the spending targets of the government have not been fully achieved at this point in time. Thus, we must continue to consider all options. And if the unions cannot agree to furlough, and let me be very clear, the furlough cannot be implemented without the agreement of the unions, then the government would need to consider reductions in service levels or programs. That said, it is government's intent to now move forward with producing a national budget for 2015-2016. In closing my comments, the decisions that government will make affect all sectors of our community, but the government's fiscal and economic challenges require that very tough and painfully difficult decisions have to be made to get us where we need to go. As I've noted, we must continue to build confidence in Bermuda so that we can continue to grow and prosper and turn around the tides of our economy. With that said, I will ask the Deputy Premier and the Minister of Finance to make some comments, and then we will be happy to take some questions. Thank you. Sir.
Thank you, Premier. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. To ensure that the public are fully aware of the kinds of cost reductions being considered, I wish to share some of the proposals that have been agreed to by the government and the BTUC. The unions have agreed to our proposed expenditure reductions, including place a cap on financial assistance to reduce the allocations to that line item by $5 million, to achieve reduction of approximately $1 million by consolidating schools, to reduce the travel budget by $1 million, to raise the GEHI contribution that employees pay for uninsured spouses from 50% to 75%, cutting costs by $1.6 million, to suspend the agricultural exhibition for 1 year, a savings, or a cut, I should say, of $0.4 million. Some of our proposals which were not agreed to by the BTUC include a cost shifting of employee pensions, increasing the rate paid by employees and decreasing that rate paid by the government by 1%, realizing a cost reduction of $3.5 million. A payment of all overtime at straight time, that was our proposal. Instead, the unions agreed to accept overtime that is normally paid at double time at time and a half. They did not agree to any changes to overtime that is currently paid at time and a half. As a further note, the Bermuda Police Service and corrections officers were not in agreement in paying 50% of their health benefits, as is the case with all other negotiating bodies. This option is still being discussed with the police union, and we're trying to move to make that just and equitable across the whole public service. Well, those are the proposed moves that we made and the responses, and we'd be quite happy, as the Premier indicated, to answer any questions.
Premier, our information reaching our newsroom is that throughout the last 3 days, you were perfectly fine with the furlough days being taken off the table. However, there were members of your cabinet who were not in agreement. Is this true?
Any discussions that cabinet colleagues have stays in this room, so I have no further comment to that question.
I note the resolution that furlough days will be kept on basically as a last resort. Do you regret not taking this position from the very beginning to avoid the last 3 days of send-off?
I think that question should be more aptly proposed to the BTUC. Our position was always very clear that all options had to be considered. That's still our position. If we're going to get out of the expenditure mess that we have in government, where we're spending too much money, we need to make some very difficult decisions. If you take options off the table, you tie your hands, and that clearly is not in the best interest of the civil service, the government, and the people of Bermuda, and we'll do what we can to try to move us forward. The position on Monday night was that furloughs were still on the table. It only came off the table Tuesday morning when I had a conversation with Union President Chris Ferber. It came back on the table late yesterday afternoon. But all options need to be on the table because we have to turn the tide. Let me just say the numbers for you very clearly. This coming financial year, it is anticipated that government will lose $270 million. That is simply unsustainable. And if we want to continue to think that we can kick the can down the road, the can has now grown into a boulder, and it's getting harder to push the boulder down the road. We need to make decisions not only to protect the civil service and the government finances at this point, but more importantly, every year and every generation. This government intends to do that in the most fair and equitable way.
So where do we go from here? What's the next step?
As I said in my comments, the next step is, because we're up against the time constraint of the budget being 3 weeks away from tomorrow, that the Ministry of Finance is going to go ahead and put the budget together. We've had discussions with the working group since last October. They came to the table. They did get a lot accomplished. They've helped out quite a bit, but the numbers just don't add up to where we need to be. So the Ministry of Finance will put the budget together, and the Minister of Finance will approve that budget before we go to the House. Now, let me answer a question that you haven't posed yet, but I'm sure will be posed at some time, if not in this room, outside this room. Why don't the numbers of the BTUC and the government jive? Simple answers is, take one area, for example. Take the area of vacant funded posts and the hiring freeze that goes forward. Currently, as we speak, from over the past couple of days and weeks, there is about $26 million worth of unfunded vacant posts throughout government. The Ministry of Finance believes that it is prudent to say that only 16 million of that can come out of the budget. Because quite obviously, if you're going to have a hiring freeze, you will have essential positions that will have to be filled. The unions believe you can take over 20 million out of that and get to where you need to go. This government is not about to be in a position where we will not hire essential people to do the job. So that's about 5 million in disagreement right there. There's other disagreements in early retirement rates. How many people will retire? If you look at the last couple of years of retirement, the numbers have fluctuated between 50 and 125. So what are you going to budget for, 50? Or are you going to budget for 150? You have to be very careful. One thing about the Ministry of Finance and this finance minister, when this finance minister delivers a budget, it's going to be as accurate as can be, as witnessed the budget in the first one that the One Bermuda Alliance put down 2 years ago. I think we were $3 million out at the end of the day. That is impressive. One of the challenges that the former government got into was for 5 or 6 years in a row, the budgets were never even close. There's a number that I've stated many times on the floor of the House of Assembly. Within the last 5 or 6 budgets of the Progressive Labour Party government, they were $500 million out from what they budgeted for and what was spent. Forget about what you said you were going to do and didn't accomplish. But $500 million out means we had to go back and borrow $500 million to cover spending we didn't expect. Now, I could see some leeway in there, but $500 million over 5 or 6 years, it's not acceptable. If it's $10, $15 million a year, $20 million a year, you can live with it. If you've got extraordinary circumstances, such as a hurricane, which will cost us a few $1,000,000 for cleanup, you can live with that type of stuff. This government's not going to put us in that position. So we have to control spending, and we have to raise revenue. The current financial year, we're going to spend $45 million more than we're going to raise. That's not acceptable. Forget about capital spending. Forget about deficit spending. Sorry, debt repayment, which is about $165, $170 million a year. These are real numbers. This is not us making stuff up, putting it on the paper. This is real stuff we have to deal with. So I get it. People are very concerned about where we need to go. But we will make the tough decisions in the most compassionate and understanding way. And we will protect the future for all of Bermudians.